Hi there. This is a continuation of my coverage on the George R.R. Martin podcast interview with the new showrunner for House of the Dragon, Ryan Condal, which they gave last week of September, but I've been backlogged due to filming reports, and they just ended first week in November. Then I got really sick for a week and my channel had to shut down, but I'm back now and I'm still reporting on this, and I wanted to give it the time it deserved. That when people ask, well, why didn't you talk about it? Well, I could recite what happened for 5 minutes, but sitting down and analyzing it line by line is a time investment. I can't just dash that off, and there's all the other filming news we're covering. So it's not just me reciting them going, wow, we have fun working together. The point of this video is Benioff and Weiss said the same things about Martin, and it turns out they were lying. That actually gleaning what they mean about their working relationship is difficult and nuanced with any adaptation by anyone in film or television. And it was upsetting when I saw this is the same thing that happened last time around. I saw a handful of mainstream news channels like Screen Rant and Looper, who are posting all sorts of crap these days. I mean, mainstream, not a person on YouTube, but news sites going, wow, turns out it was a good experience working together. What, you expect them to say if they were arguing all the time? That we need to give this real attention. And I was going to make a video on this, but I'm splitting it off to give it more attention, because just the other day, actually, I was having a discussion about this specific issue with Carmine from Red Team Review. He private messaged me when he found out about this podcast, and he asked, is this legitimate? What do you make of them saying Martin is working with us? Exactly how much is he working on it? Like, is he in the writer's room? Is he doing stuff? Well, it's a complicated answer. I said yes and no. That I think he's more involved with this than he was on Game of Thrones seasons 5 through 8. And more than he was on that Long Night prequel. That was awful. So it's not, I'm against simplistic answers because it leads into everyone. You remember not just season 8, but the other declining seasons when the cast, like best season ever, and just they're never going to complain when they're actually being sidelined. And what do we make of that? So this is a meta commentary on the nature of they never really tell us the truth and just how much we were lied to by the first show. The short version of what they actually said before I analyze it is Condal said, let's see, there's some quotes here. And again, if you want to listen to clips of this, it's a mix of two podcasts. It's the one I already posted the 15-minute chunk of, and another one that Condal recently gave this week with Dune Podcast. But it's called the Dune Podcast, even though the episode was about James Cameron's Aliens. Because Ryan Condal runs, one of his big hobbies is he runs a classic movie props trading website, and he's a collector. So he's talking about collecting like on-screen props from James Cameron's Aliens. So he went on to the show to talk about that, and he only talked about House of the Dragon for the first 20 minutes. And because I'm pressed for time, and I don't, I'd be quoting the whole thing anyway, link is in the description box. Watch the first 20 minutes of that, and the whole 15-minute thing I loaded up already. Now, this was the Dune podcast. I'm intercutting both in my mind here because they happened recently. In the Dune podcast episode on aliens, Condal said 4 things here. George has been really involved and also very generous with his time. And he said that we are texting and emailing back and forth very frequently. He emphasized we are doing this all the time. Not just, oh yeah, we sent him a letter. He said, like on a daily basis, I am texting back and forth with story questions. And in part, this is due to the time difference between George in New Mexico and them filming in Europe, which is like 7 hours. So he said that's the reason we're not having face-to-face, video conferences just due to the time difference. But there's about a 4-hour stretch every day where I'm at least texting and emailing him constantly while we were filming. And he directly compared it to, it's as if Tolkien were still alive and I was allowed to ask him writing choices. which is a great thing to say, and also consider, without exaggeration, how many magazines in season 3 were saying George R. R. Martin is the American Tolkien. And then by like season 6, after season 6 aired, they were saying, we don't need Martin. Who cares about adapting his books? They're telling a better story. Look at how much stuff they had on screen in The Battle of the Bastards, which was terribly written. There's all sorts of plot holes in it, but they threw a lot of money at the screen to have a lot of people in a giant movie-scale action scene. And I'm humiliated and ashamed and insulted that people were that weak. And not just people on the street. I mean, news sites whose job it is to point out, this is just empty spectacle, the writing is meaningless, just started worshipping at the altar of Benioff and Weiss. They drank the Kool-Aid, and you got what you deserved if you were going into season 8 still in love with these guys. Because everything in season 8 was just a slightly more exaggerated version of things they were already doing in season 5, in terms of showing off the actors, the faces, not asking Martin if things made sense to his storyverse or not, like dragons zipping to the wall and back in season 7. The American Tolkien is still alive, and you chose to ignore him. Versus Condell, who is stressing every time, at least trying to play it as, whether he's being truthful or not, actually trying to stress, anything I did, Martin can back up. I'd like to see that on a specific case-by-case point, but there was a point like after season 6 where Benioff and Weiss were just saying, this is our show, this is not Martin's anymore, and they were no longer trying to play up that Martin is on the team, even though the first 4 seasons we got duped into trusting them because they presented it as Martin is heavily collaborating with us, and retroactively we found out he really wasn't. So he said, George is very involved. We've been texting back constantly. It's like having the American Tolkien to ask him adaptation questions. And, quote, if George told me it was okay, I can then face the Reddit critics. That he said, the way he phrased it was, I have cited things from Martin to back me up. Come at me, Reddit. If for specific things. So, like, obviously we're waiting on things like their explanation for the race casting of the Valyrians. But assuredly that's something he discussed with Martin, and they can at least tell us their reasoning behind it. Even if Martin might have disagreed, but there was a discussion. Versus we assumed Benioff and Weiss had reasons behind the things that they did, or that they chose things. And in many cases, it turns out they kind of forgot. That it wasn't, well, we had a discussion about how fast can a raven get to the wall and then a dragon fly up there. I don't think they noticed. Or basic mistakes like Gendry rivers or coffee cups around. This wasn't, but other things, that this wasn't a measured character decision, what Jon and Arya are doing in season 7. This is, you're showing off the actors or you're just lazy. That we would, remember when we would ask them questions and they would deflect, rather than saying, well, this is my argument for that. Like Rian Johnson on Star Wars, say what you will, he had reasoning behind the things that he did. We might disagree with his reasoning, but the way I say it is, he's playing the same game that we are, in which we have a dialectic back and forth discussion of point by point, well, I interpret this point this way, therefore my reasoning is this, and I feel it's justified. In a different case, we may not. Versus Benioff and Weiss doing stupid things, and then when you ask them, why is this happening, an obvious plot hole, they go, I guess we kind of forgot. That they're not playing the same game as we are, with measured decisions and trade-offs that go into those choices. Condell, it appears, it's hard to say because they always lie to us, but he generally seems to have backed up everything with a discussion, whether we agree with it or not. That I really worried, moving on now, a lot of channels feel the need to overhype this and just reported on it for 5 minutes as a soundbite, then stopped a month ago when this came out. And you want to believe that. And we've seen this time and again. So I'm going over that this has happened before. That is Martin working with this, like Red Team Review asked. I don't know if he's credited as a co-writer in, like, the on-screen credits would say, this episode co-written by George R.R. Martin. Nor do I think that he is a token consultant, like on Game of Thrones, where they say, no, he's a consultant. What does that even mean, a consultant? And we eventually found out that whatever mental rescue fantasies we had, that no, Martin must have had a roundtable discussion with Benioff and Weiss about this story change in, like, season 2. Turns out, he said, they just mail me a letter or a quick email. I'll shoot them back. They send it once, and they feel free to ignore me. That you're like someone who's the technical advisor on getting the CGI accurate, or the architecture advisor for when they're designing castles. They feel free to ignore them. And this is not a co-equal thing. So the point is, he seems to have been having real discussions with Condal. Seems, at least, because for so long, we were living in this world of propaganda that I don't know it's real anymore, and the gradual realization that HBO is just that willing to lie about how good things were behind the scenes since day one. That we were lied to since day one on the unaired pilot. I'm going to cover that in its turn in just a few weeks, but one of the really horrifying things was the chapter on the pilot, which they put out as a preview chapter, and a lot of you have seen this. But in short, the part where Martin says, at one point they were having a debate about a story point. Not a technical thing, but a story point. And he was standing right in front of them, and they have never filmed an episode before. These are new guys and like, it's as if Benioff had a story question, and instead of asking George, who was standing there, turned to Weiss and started debating this story point as if George wasn't in the room. And it's really disturbing to read it. And that Martin says, that was the first moment, and from then on, I realized they were not treating me seriously as a consultant, and were shutting me out of the adaptation process. This is in Hibbard's book. This is a free-form, me ranting video, you understand. I'm going to make a shorter and more concise one in a few weeks when I get to Hibbard's book, pointing out Martin himself saying, whatever you saw behind the scenes on their promotional behind-the-scenes videos, I was really actually shut out of the adaptation process, to the point of, like, simple questions, not even a decision, but just like, hey, what was that thing in the story? And the guy who wrote the book is standing there, and you turn to ask him that. It's as if Tolkien were alive, and I forgot how tall hobbits are, and standing in front of him at a table or something, I instead turned to ask some other rando, hey, how tall did the book say hobbits are? And they responded, I think 3.5 feet tall. When Tolkien is standing right there, why wouldn't you ask him? That the absurdity. Benioff and Weiss actually did get worse over time as the show was progressing. We've seen people saying this, even Nikolai Coster-Waldau saying season 7 was very different from season 6. They started getting really possessive. And season 8 even more so than season 7. But that's just bad getting worse. That from that interview book, from other things, we found out there wasn't some switch that went off between seasons 4 and 5 that they suddenly got bad. They were always bad behind the scenes since the beginning. And it just reached a point where HBO couldn't hide it anymore. It's like when, like, a musician has a drug problem or something, and people go, wow, I can't believe this started just a month ago, the first time we saw them drunk in public. Like, guys, it was probably getting steadily worse for a while in private, and it just reached a point where they couldn't hide it anymore when you're a functional addict or something. But that's just the musicians and stuff. This, you really think that things just suddenly went bad in season 5. And the people who, this would fall apart on 2 minutes if we bothered to yell back at them. People who go, oh yeah, they ran out of source material. No, season 5, they abandoned so much of the 4th and 5th books with the Sansa rape and TV Dorn. That, remember, these are people who don't want to be told otherwise, who are so inured to the Matrix, inured to the system, that they want to cling to the fantasy that Benioff and Weiss were these amazing guys since the beginning who were working with Martin, and then it was mean old Martin's fault that he didn't finish the books, and that's why season 8 was bad. When he told them his outline of the future books, they chose to ignore it. And that isn't that far-fetched, because they had finished novels, the 4th and 5th ones. They gutted Dorne, turned into this bad camp B-movie dialogue thing, the Sansa rape, butchering Stannis. They chose to do that, but there was always that tension where they didn't really want to do the books, they wanted to show off the actors. And things like back in season 2 where they were going off book. It's just as they got more confident, they stopped hiding it as much. The point is, though, I know I'm rambling, in interviews that we have gotten now and things that leak out, we gradually hear the friendly, gregarious routine that Benioff does in his own behind-the-scenes videos, which are not candid. They are promotional materials he approved and put out to paint himself in a positive light. We get so many interviews contradicting that no, he was micromanaging people, or he wasn't really working with Martin. He wasn't collaborating with the actors, he was micromanaging them, telling them what to do all over their own objections. Or fighting with directors when they said, don't film an exterior night scene under natural lighting. It won't show up on screen. That's what happened in the unaired pilot. And for months, when the things, it's not just, oh, well, how was I supposed to know? When directors were yelling at them, not even story debates, oh, we're collaborating on story decisions. What level of collaboration is there when these are people who told directors, film the long night battle at night against a black screen? Or that Sapochnik had to argue them down from having a melee pile using live horses, because that would kill horses and probably stuntmen. That isn't collaboration, that's arguing them down from insanity, much less collaboration. But to stick to the writing stuff, I know I'm rambling through this and I want to cut it down. I'm still stunned at how much they lied to us, and it's that big lie principle, that we're used to them exaggerating a little. Like they go, oh, we had a wonderful time working with the cast and crew, and you expect filmmakers to lie a little about that. If they were actively fighting with the showrunner, you expect them to just not call attention to it. That they're not going to outright lie. If they had a truly bad relationship with the casting and the writers, they won't draw attention to it. It's that failure of imagination that Benioff and Weiss plus HBO are utterly shameless and willing to flat out say, when they had a miserable work relationship, we had the best work relationship ever. You've seen the season 8 behind the scenes things saying Benioff and Weiss are so generous and they listen to us. And why are you you're doubling down on that when it's not exaggeration? You actually have an actively hostile relationship with these guys. They're really fighting with them. And still acting like all is well. And so many people got fooled by that these are their own behind-the-scenes videos. This isn't what their real relationship is like. It's like the difference between that Last Watch documentary where they stupidly hired third-party documentary crew who didn't know that they're supposed to hide it as much. The difference between how director Sapochnik and production designer Deborah Riley are really critical of Benioff and Weiss in that, in utter contrast to the way that they're all smiles and laughs and it's a wonderful experience to work with them in the inside the episodes, which those things are scripted. They sold us a story, which I called the meta story, that it's all scripted, the behind-the-scenes things, and even how they act at public events like red carpet things a little. I think of it like Amazon's The Boys, and I've said this in videos, I have a whole video comparing it to The Boys, where the superheroes have spin doctors who script out their public appearances on camera, and people think it's real. That they make Starlight say she has such a wonderful relationship with the Deep and with Homelander, and they're fighting behind the scenes. And this ties into celebrity culture in general and TV in general, that there's all this tension on set, and they want to sell us that it's this amazing experience. and we kind of sometimes think they're exaggerating. This is shameless, open lies of things that are the exact opposite. And if you think that's implausible, think of the 2017 Justice League movie. That when you saw trailers for it, you saw promos trying to put it in the best positive light, and in reality, they brought in this new guy who rewrote the entire movie, refilmed much of it, and they would have people say, like, oh, Joss is great, he's this wonderful guy, when behind the scenes, we know they were fighting with him. The things that Ray Fisher accused by late 2017, 2018, and that celebrity cult that people want to believe the meta story that behind the scenes, this is a wonderful experience. It took a couple of years to break that. Like, it was 4 years between when it came out, when the Snyder Cut came out, and people didn't believe Ray Fisher, didn't believe eventually Gal Gadot saying he openly threatened me to ruin my career by making the character unlikable, then walked around boasting about it to make everyone else fall in line. Joss is a terrible person. And not just like recently, that retroactively, the frightening thing is earlier this year, how the Buffy cast members came out and said he has always been like this. He was like this 20 years ago when we were making Buffy. He is a petty dictator. He pranks people. Joss Whedon would lie to people just for fun. And they said he did it to break people. And he is a deeply narcissistic, deeply unpleasant to be with person. Not even counting the sleeping with interns thing, which that's private, but publicly in his work relationship with these actors, they were miserable working with him. He was this petty tyrant. And just how much we got sold on the myth that in 2008, Joss Whedon was the king of Comic-Con, and this is all scripted. The meta show that we see in the behind-the-scenes interviews, that's scripted. So it's really not that big of a stretch that we were told in seasons 1 through 4 of Game of Thrones this meta story about how much Benioff and Weiss are working with Martin, respect him, and collaborate with him on anything. And belatedly it came out that, well, really, they weren't listening to me since the pilot. So when I see a new interview where the new showrunner is saying I actually have a good work relationship with him, I shoot him questions, Benioff and Weiss said the same things. So I'm a little cautious, even though the way he said it in this interview, plus talking with Martin in the other recent interview, it sounded like they have a good relationship. That he didn't just with Jane Goldman for Long Night, he just met her when they assigned her to this. That he explained in the longer thing, or Benioff and Weiss were guys he had to pitch it to because no one else would take it. He's known Ryan Condal for 10 years. He worked his way in his social circle because, hey, he's the guy that wrote these great novels, but he's been a fan of his stuff on Colony. He liked the Western that he filmed that didn't get made for Sixth Gun, was filmed near where he lives in New Mexico, and he knew a couple of cast members, so they came along. They knew people who knew each other, like Pedro Pascal. So he has a better relationship with Ryan Condal than he did with Benioff or with Goldman before they joined. That's something. But guys, every interview they're going to be saying, any showrunner on any project that's an adaptation is going to be saying what a great relationship they have with the author. And you have to learn to read between the lines. Generally, these did sound like really good interviews. Like, if he's lying, he's a better liar than Benioff was at how good things are. Because, and Martin was there in the other interview and could have contradicted this, and he didn't, that Benioff would say, oh yeah, I have so many discussions with him. Condal could actually go a little more in depth on specific things he was doing with Martin. Specific discussions, or we were tweeting back and forth the other day on something, and the way he said, come at me, Reddit. If you have a question about a specific thing I did, I can cite the exact discussion I had with Martin that justifies this change, or this detail that was a little vague in the books. Well and good, and I look forward to him citing that full conversation. That's what we never did with Benioff. That he would say, I discussed things with Martin, and he'd never have to prove it. Like, when we were in denial, like in season 2, with why are they doing this to Lyssa's stuff? What are they doing to Karth? We just assumed Martin was in on the change for the needs of a live-action adaptation. It's really, he'd stopped listening to Martin. He wasn't listening since the beginning. That Condell will need to back this kind of thing up. If he's had discussions with Martin, that it seems he has, and that Benioff just stopped giving interviews after a point, if Condell can give a long-form explanation of, well, these are why we did these things with the Velaryons, or something simple like, why did we make Vaemond Velaryon Corlys's younger brother instead of his nephew? I'd ask that, and he said, well, the condensation needs of a TV show. There's too many Velaryons to fit in a live-action show. I'd actually agree with that. I'd just like to hear, you ran this by Martin, right? That kind of thing. There's really two halves to this, and I don't want to rant on this forever, but I'm keeping a good pace here. The first half there's two key points. First, Benioff and Weiss and studios in general are willing to shamelessly lie to us about how good of a relationship they have with their cast and with the writers, if there's source material. I mean, this goes back to decades. I mean, like, how many times have you heard about, like, sitcoms, like The Brady Bunch or something, where they maintained in public that we're this wonderful family of a cast, and behind the scenes they were all at each other's throats and fighting each other constantly. Or any other show, like Star Trek shows, I know there are a lot of examples of cast who were prima donnas and really fighting with each other. Any long-running series where there's rival factions in the writer's room, and then they go, oh, we're all getting along fine. But that's just the usual workplace stuff. You assume that. And, they make something functional in the end, versus this is an overtly abusive relationship. And I don't mean to cite the example of the Weinstein stuff in the sense that was very specifically the Me Too legal thing. But how many actors, not just Weinstein, but other things, I'm talking about in general, I'm not accusing Benioff of that kind of specific abuse. How many times have you seen cast and crew saying, we have a wonderful relationship, and then they'll later admit we never spoke outside of work? That, no, we are not all a family of friends here. And we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't lie like that. You think someone could expose that so no one would be brazen enough to lie like that, therefore no one researches it? Who fact-checks when they say they're friends? Maybe some of the big franchises, again, like Star Trek, Star Wars has actual books about these were the rival factions behind the scenes on any given decision. I really respect John Boyega for his honesty on Star Wars, saying, no, it wasn't a wonderful experience. I really feel Rian didn't give my character the focus or attention he deserved, that he focused so much, for good or ill, on writing the Luke, Rey, and Kylo A-plot of Last Jedi, that the entire second half of the movie felt like it was a rough draft. That he could have given more focus to that, and I am not amused by this. And I'm not a rabid hate fandom, you understand. It's, oh, you're toxic fans. There are legitimate complaints about what happened, but I want a measured response. That Rian Johnson isn't the devil. Like, a lot of problems he inherited from Abrams not planning things out. What was he supposed to do? And Johnson had good ideas for the Rey and Kylo, and even Luke stuff, depending on how well you think he affected and realized these, but on paper, good ideas. It's just, on the other hand, I criticize you didn't really plan out much for Boyega to do, or for Poe to do. Please don't launch into a huge discussion of this in the comments, but it was refreshing that the Star Wars cast were willing to talk about us honestly with their writing concerns. And to their credit, Johnson and Star Wars didn't really try to emphasize everyone agrees with Rian. They didn't try to call a deer a horse and say, no, everything is fine, we're one big happy family. In going against the grain that much, that HBO is much more corrupt than that. They were willing to just the meta commentary, the meta story, which is a show unto itself, the behind the scenes videos, we're willing to paint it that Martin is closely working with these guys. Like how in the early seasons, when they'd have the inside the episode, the insides and stuff, and also that running commentary thing, when you visually see a montage intercutting George R.R. Martin then Benioff talking about something. You see clip of Benioff, clip of Martin, then clip of Weiss talking about something. Your mind kind of makes you think they're all on the same page, when really they're not. And through use of Martin in the behind-the-scenes videos, they were really trying to sell he's on board with this. And why isn't he openly complaining? I think he might have an NDA, or he's too professional to yell, which Harlan Ellison would have yelled. He's not Harlan Ellison. I'm still upset about it. But they emphasize, oh, Martin must be on board with this. That got pathetic by seasons 5 to 8, when he wouldn't even do inside the episodes with them anymore. It wasn't just he got too busy doing the next book. It's he said, they've changed so much, I don't know what I'm writing on this. I couldn't write for season 5, even if I had the time. That Martin quietly abandoned them. That they couldn't even, like at the Emmy Awards, he stopped coming to their Emmy Awards. And they try to downplay that and try to still say, oh, no, by that point they weren't even emphasizing we're friends with Martin, because by then it was too late. They had already, seasons 1 to 4, they had already reached the heights of power. But point one is, they are willing to shamelessly lie to us about a lot of things, about their relationship with Martin, about the fact that they don't know how cameras work. The HBO always knew what Benioff and Weiss are, and you'll see that as I get into more reporting on their pilot. I've already done some of that, talking about they knew these guys were insane. They knew they were liars. Looking at it, that there's nothing but close-ups in this whole thing, and you filmed it at night. You can't even see that you filmed on location. This is Mike Lombardo, the head of HBO, and Richard Plepler were looking at this, and they just said, look, you want to get all that $10 million you invested in foreign pre-sales back or not? They used sunk cost fallacy to hook them in. That Benioff and Weiss were shamelessly willing to say we're the new Peter Jackson when they're not. They don't even know how cameras work, don't know how screenwriting works. And HBO was shamelessly willing to sell them so they could get their money back. But that's only point one. And if anything, that's actually the less frightening part of this, that studios are willing to lie to us about their own content. Anyone who's, tried to buy a used car or something should know the guy is going to tell me his thing is better than it is. We should be aware of that. Shame on us for believing them, for being that shameful. The shamelessness of it. I keep saying shame. Sorry. It's point two is the thing that frightens me even more of the 2 points. Even if they weren't lying like that about our work relationship with Martin, entertainment news or just fan news channels are willing to lie about that because they want to believe it. That without input from Benioff and Weiss and HBO, I'm not even talking about access journalism. I said a big thing is Entertainment Weekly got all these exclusive interviews because they were willing to not just exaggerate, flat out lie about how good things were going on behind the scenes. That's understandable. People who want to maintain a good work relationship with HBO, access journalism, that's part of it. But extending even beyond that to like news sites that would never get interviews, wanted to believe that Benioff was this genius. And you'd see them struggling with mental gymnastics to justify and build up a mountain into a molehill, to build up that, well, I shot Martin an email once, would turn into a news article on Benioff says he's intimately working with Martin on all decisions. When they never said that. Or that they were reading in what they wanted to believe. And this is, I think, a problem is we don't have objective, detached reporters. So many news sites, the reporters themselves were fans who were making their own excuses. And this happens for a lot of shows. If you're invested in something for a long time, you'll make mental excuses about, it's still good, it's still good. No, they still have a good relationship with Martin, because it was easier to believe the fantasy than the hard truth that this guy's really incompetent and he's not working with the showrunners. And they're sort of intimating that. They go, oh, that was taken out of context. And they build up stray comments about, Benioff thought it was a good idea to film it this way once. They build that up into he's a genius, and he's probably repeating something someone else said. They wanted to believe he was this genius and had a wonderful work relationship. And case in point, and this is really the core of this video, even though I'm 35 minutes into this. This is what happened with the Long Night pilot. Pausing for emphasis. That this thing had nothing to do with Martin, when even he was publicly saying, I have nothing to do with this. That this is a guy who was too polite to publicly say, Benioff and Weiss aren't listening to me anymore, was openly saying, they are not listening to me. He washed his hands. He never said, I washed my hands. He just said, this is Jane Goldman's show. It's Jane Goldman's show. It's not really mine. And he said it politely in this New York Times interview. I'll link you in the description box below to the video where I go over exactly what they said. I'm not going to take the time to splice it in here, because this is just a random recording it live. I'm not going to edit it. But look at, it's short. It's the thing where he said, what exactly are we doing? And he said, she had maybe 2 conversations with me, was free to take notes that I didn't want to make a Long Night prequel. I didn't even want to make it as a novella, much less as a TV show. It shouldn't be adapted. It's supposed to be the myth of the distant past, never fully elaborated. That she had her own ideas for stories and characters, and once or twice I'd intimate, well, there's this other thing that kind of contradicts, and she was free to ignore me. He was open and honest about that, and to her credit, Jane Goldman never tried to play the same game that Benioff and Weiss did, claiming, I'm working intimately with Martin on this. HBO itself didn't try to do that. Probably because it would have been ridiculously impossible. Even at a level that Game of Thrones, tried to he is so unrelated to this. It isn't adapting something he wrote. It is just the basic idea of Stark's, White Walker's Long Night, just as sound bites. That, to their credit, HBO, possibly just because they physically couldn't, made no attempt to tie Martin into this, nor to Jane Goldman. For that matter, it was hard to get hyped about Jane Goldman because she never gave a single interview, before or after she worked on it. All the stuff that was of the 2 points. Point 1, the showrunner or HBO itself trying to hype the meta. They know how to craft their own myth of, I'm this genius new showrunner. And they did that with Benioff. They did not attempt that with Jane at all. We never met her. She never gave an interview. HBO itself never tried to hype Martin's involvement. She didn't try to hype Martin's involvement, because there was none. And this is the crux of the video, that how horrified I was that news sites took that, and fan channels, and turned it into, Martin is heavily working on the Long Night prequel. Despite all evidence to the contrary, that Martin had given this interview in the New York Times saying, I'm not, she met me once or twice, but I have to emphasize the story and characters are her. I gave her 1 or 2 corrections on story background, which she might have even ignored. And he said in as many words, this is all Jane's show. The story ideas, the character ideas, it's all her, not me. And news sites took this and twisted it into, Martin has been heavily working with Jane Goldman on ideas for this. I met her once, and it wasn't a good meeting. It was brief. And it's not just for access journalism. It's actual news sites, not fan-run, but news as entertainment business, wanted to build up the Long Night prequel, even though it was a ridiculous idea. Remember that this was in the second half of 2018. This was announced summer 2018, where the hype for Season 8 had reached truly cult status, that this was a drink the Kool-Aid time. The people who did not like Season 7 just forgot it, caught up in the fervor over Season 8 is coming. So I think that the reason I'm jealous that House of the Dragon has to struggle, even though it's based on probably the best, most fully developed prequel book, short of, well, Dunk and Egg is different. It's a shorter narrative, but it's narrativized, but it's more focused on just 2 people, versus this is a prequel novella outline, but it's of a sweeping continent-wide war, so it's different. But what Martin himself thinks is one of the 2 best ideas. And he submitted Dance of the Dragons for a story. House of the Dragon is being ignored now because it has to struggle with the after effects of people did not scrutinize Benioff and Weiss until it was too late. And all the people saying, I told you so, well, no one wants to admit we were wrong to trust Benioff and Weiss for a decade. Whereas, while it had its moment in the sun, a long night having its moment in the sun, while it had its moment for that year that it was doing from summer 2018 to around September 2019 when they'd finished the pilot, everyone poured all of their hopes and dreams into the Long Night prequel. Part of the mass hysteria rubbing off from season 8. And one of the major aspects of this, because I know you guys in the comments, you might not be paying as much attention, and just compared to me reporting on this, news sites, not just other, it's bad enough that fan channels on YouTube were getting hyped about it, about Martin's involvement in it, even though he directly stated, I met with her once, I'm not really involved, and that mutated into, he met with her all the time. Like, mainstream news sites that should be having some sense of reading comprehension and not just naively reposting things, were ranting, they must have a wonderful relationship with Martin, and you're reporting on what you wish to be true, rather than what is known to be true. It's not based on facts and citations anymore. So this has been a podcast. I'm not going to put photos to it in 45 minutes here. I hope you've I'm worried that the basic point was simple enough. You can look at the link to the first 20 minutes of the podcast he gave, saying, I'm texting with Martin all the time, and any decision I've made that you think is controversial or a story change not explicitly in the book, hey, Reddit, come at me. I have cited discussions with Martin of Martin told me to do it this way, and he said it was okay. I'm thinking even on just character names or story elements, or was that guy that guy's brother or his uncle, anything. And okay, Mr. Condal, you seem so far better than Benioff was when he started. You seem to have a good relationship with Martin. You actually are a TV showrunner and not some moderate novelist. No, he's got TV production work. It's just once bitten, twice shy. That I have cautious optimism, and Condal said I can cite things Martin did, and he said it much more specifically than Benioff ever did. But I'll wait and see. Because the two things are, showrunners and their networks are willing to lie about their faithfulness to the author of the source material, and the second one, which is even more frightening, is fans want to believe that. In the month since these interviews came out, and the other one was last week, a lot of people just, Looper and Screen Rant, who just run anything as a paragraph-long soundbite. This isn't news. Wow, Condal says he is working with Martin. What does that even mean? And they don't question it, just as they didn't question Benioff. While I'm disgusted with Benioff, I'm more disgusted that this system was in place that allowed him to thrive. That they were this corrupt, this naive, this shallow based on celebrity culture, that a flim-flam man, a music man, a grifter could come in just based on appearances and play them for fools. And he wasn't even that skilled at it. It's they were that bad at weeding out someone like this. And part of the reason they don't want to talk about it is they are ashamed that they let Benioff get as far as he should. And you should be ashamed. That's the first step in the healing process. They'd rather just go, well, I guess everything was always great, when we have reports that they were fighting since the beginning. You don't want to believe them. So, what is the situation with how much is Martin contributing to this? I'm wary of anything Condal says, even if he says it in good faith. I trust what Martin says, which has generally been optimistic. That cross-referencing these two podcasts, how far am I in this? I am 44 minutes in. I'm trying to wrap it up now. I feel good about Ryan Condal. I like him. It's just I liked Benioff when he started because I bought into the propaganda, because what did I know? I wasn't running a news site back in season 1. Why wouldn't I believe these behind-the-scenes videos? That they were lying that much would have been absurd. But Condal seems pretty good. I am privately getting hyped about him. It's just, my heart wants to be hyped for Ryan Condal, but my mind is wary now that everything happened with Benioff. And the Long Night prequel, where it wasn't even Benioff or HBO, it's the fan news channels wanting it to be like that. That what they said was, well, I think one of the clever things that Benioff and Weiss did, or HBO, they let Martin write one episode per season, the first 4 seasons, and then let the fans assume that he was part of writing discussions with them. He actually wasn't. But on paper, it looked like, well, he's contributing a script per season. I guess they're not physically meeting. They're not having teleconferences. There is no writer's room where they're debating these things. That it had the appearance on paper of Martin heavily collaborating with them when he was actually shut out of the executive level decisions. That if he put out a script, they could overrule anything that was in it. Like the fact that Martin wrote the Battle of the Blackwater episode for season 2 did not mean that Talissa was a choice, or the Karth stuff was a thing he wanted to make. But I remember even season 3, I was going, well, Martin's working so closely with him, isn't he? Because he was technically credited with a script, which they were free to change. This culminates in his final script, the one for season 4 for The Lion and the Rose, for the Purple Wedding episode. But the other stuff in it, there's bits of Bolton stuff in that, where eventually Kim Renfro and Business Insider managed to find a copy of the archived script, because Martin archives his scripts at this library in Texas that made an archive for him, and they report, I've reported on this before, that the script that Martin wrote for season 4 had set up for fake Arya in it. You know, Jane Poole? That as late as season 4, he was still thinking they would set up the fake Arya storyline as Jane Poole is forced to marry Ramsay Bolton pretending to be Arya. And how dare you tell me he's in the writer's room, therefore he must be in on that they're doing the Sansa rape. Or maybe not, because he wasn't a writer on season 5. And people, why do you think he left? Well, I have to focus on the books. He said, because they're changing it so much, I can't keep writing this. How could he write a story for, like, season 5, in which, in the background, not necessarily the Sansa rape episode, it's not just, oh, well, the one time, the way they filmed it. This entire subplot is gutting Sansa as a character. Even season 6, she isn't doing anything. And he would point out that these are just people acting out of character. Imagine if Martin had been forced to stay somehow through season 8. Wouldn't he be the one pointing out to them, for God's sake, Jon Snow is just saying, I don't want it, and you are my queen, every other scene. This is bad dialogue. If nothing else, he would have pointed that out. But he couldn't stay for shit like that. Because it's what they want to do. People wanted to blame anyone else but Benioff and Weiss for the decline in the show. And that Martin wouldn't come out and yell at them, but he would quietly not associate himself with it anymore. So, the 2 scenarios we have are on Game of Thrones. They kind of tricked us into thinking Martin was part of the creative process merely because he was writing one script per season, when they were free to ignore things he wrote in it. They were free to ignore written emails they sent back and forth asking story questions, which he said, he didn't say they even sent a lot of those. Just occasionally they'd send me a letter and I'd send one back. Like, I remember season 5, his only note on the Dorne subplot was, this when they land on the beach, as originally scripted, Jaime would fight everyone off very well. And he wrote them a note going, guys, don't you remember it's a plot point that Jaime lost his hand and he cannot learn to fight as well with his left hand overnight? And they did rewrite that, and it was such an obvious mistake. But he couldn't just send them notes about, like, Ilaria isn't like this, or there's logic, even taking as a given what's on screen, there's plot holes in it. That was like the one letter he sent. He wasn't collaborating with it. We had this mental image of a writer's room discussion. That wasn't happening. Crediting him with a script helped give that illusion. So, am I worried if Martin's name doesn't technically appear in the credits of House of the Dragon as a specific writer of a specific episode? I'm actually not worried about that, because I know how meaningless that can be. That if anything, it will be a sign of them trying to trick us again, that Martin's name appears in the credits. No, not just in the credits as a consultant, I mean on a specific episode's credits, where right after the title it goes, directed by Sapochnik, written by George R.R. Martin. If he's never specifically credited with a script again, I would be okay with that. because that's a simplistic answer, which is easy to fool us with, versus the much more nuanced and harder to figure out. It's just hard to figure out. Do these actors and writers on anything like a Marvel movie or this, do they really have a good working relationship? Guys, half of news media is trying to figure out the private feuds that celebrities have, creatively or just socially. That it will be an ongoing process, and we need to be eternally vigilant about how well are the writers getting along with George R.R. Martin, and every time they make a story decision, we have to scrutinize it, and it helps if they have an answer at the ready that Martin told us we could do this. That's what I thought they were going to do. I mean, even Lord of the Rings, I think those movies are 90% good, which is actually a really high rating for me. Very few things are 90% good. 90% faithful to their source material, which would have been impossible. But there's little things, you think they're trivial things, which I disagreed with Peter Jackson. But in the DVD commentary, he consistently, he's playing the same game we are. He explained, this is a little vague in the book, so this is why I changed it to this. Right? That he would have a thought-out answer, which I might even disagree with, but I can see your reasoning behind that you have an answer to back it up, based on, remember when Benioff literally said, creatively it made sense to me because I felt like it. Creatively it made sense to me because I wanted it to happen. That should, for anyone else, that statement would have ended their career. And he did that during the middle of the Sansa rape controversy. And I will never forgive or forget that he was allowed to thrive after that. The utter humiliation, and when I say humiliation, not just pride, but it was a mockery of our values. That in the middle of, you're inventing this rape subplot, Martin, you're clearly abandoning Martin's books. This is deeply offensive and poorly written on top of that. And you're allowed to, in public, say, creatively, it made sense to me. I want it to happen. And he just stopped rationalizing. I honestly think that's why Benioff seems so incoherent in the season 8 inside the episodes. I don't think he ever had to say aloud before why he was doing things. So when he says silly things like, I guess Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet, he's surrounded by so many yes men and sycophants, I don't think he ever had to verbalize to another human being why events are happening on screen the way they are. Because he doesn't have a writer's room, he doesn't have to explain it to anyone. So when he forgets things, it's not the result of a discussion, he just forgot. And there's nothing to back that up. Wow, is Martin involved with writing House of the Dragon? Whether he's credited with a script or not is meaningless to me, because it was meaningless on Game of Thrones, that they could still ignore him. Versus, it warms my heart, and I want to believe it's true, that he's actually texting back and forth little questions, or emailing little questions about, hey, how do you spell this? Or how big was that dragon compared to the other one? All sorts of little questions. He said, I'm texting back with Martin during the 4-hour gap when we're both awake due to time differences. We're texting back and forth all the time, and he's heavily doing stuff with me. I prioritize that kind of relationship over assigning Martin a token script for one episode when he doesn't have veto power, doesn't have oversight power. Better that they have that and can prove we have that kind of discussion relationship. I looked this up. Think of other major adaptations like the Harry Potter movies or the Hunger Games movies. The book author was not credited as the screenplay writer. That Harry Potter had one screenwriter through most of its run, except for Order of the Phoenix was a different one. It wasn't Rowling, even though she's a living author. For Hunger Games, I think says here Collins was credited as a co-writer on the first movie's screenplay, but out of all 4 movies, she wasn't even credited on the next 3. That if someone is trying to, I get the sense that if someone credits script co-written by the book's author, they're trying to trick us. That if they were confident enough in their abilities to make an adaptation, they wouldn't need to credit them as a co-screenwriter, you know? That, like, I just saw Dune, I'm going to make videos about that. Dune was a very faithful adaptation, but, Frank Herbert is dead. They didn't need to convince me that it was somehow co-written by a lost script that Frank Herbert had in a vault or something. That they just made a really good screenplay adaptation. That it's a sign of your lack of confidence in your screenplay person when they go, no, he's a co-writer. I will finish by saying that the exact, and this is all stemming from a conversation I had with Red Team Review over Twitter DMs, that I prioritize having a good work relationship for advice between the showrunners and Martin, rather than giving him a token script. As it turns out, in that first of these two podcasts, the one last week of September, on Condell's podcast, the Collectibles podcast, the exact phrase that not Condell, but Martin himself used was, 3 years ago, when you first got hired on to do House of the Dragon, like the tail end of 2018, we broke the script together. So Martin, not Condell, did say, we broke the script together on the pilot episode. Now, obviously, they might have rewritten it a lot in the last 3 years. But, yes, Martin at least co-wrote the first episode. And I've been trying to emphasize in this whole thing how little having his actual name on the script means to me. And I want you to worry a lot more about the second part, that even if HBO and the new showrunners on any project don't try to to lie and say Martin was involved in something when he really wasn't, a lot of news channels, even major channels and news sites, want to believe that and will overhype it, and I'm cautioning against that. He at least co-wrote, versus Jane Goldman's thing where he very much said, I met her once and it's really her show, not mine. This show, he said, I broke the pilot together with Condell. This is much more of an endorsement of that. That, on the surface level at least, are we going to have to be paranoid the rest of our lives that everyone is lying to us as much as Benioff and Weiss were since the beginning, since season 1? That, no, really, it's chaos behind the scenes. I don't know if that's paranoia, some might call it eternal vigilance, but such is the nature of fandom and adaptations. We always need to be vigilant. Are they doing a good project? How many people thought that, I'm not demonizing Last Jedi or even The Rise of Skywalker. I'm saying how many people after Force Awakens just assumed there's no way this can go wrong. There's no way that the next movies can be anything less than 100%. Even I would say, well, they could be, at times they're like 70%-ish pleasant in parts of them, but they're not 100%. There are some things the actors themselves said you could have given Finn more to do. That would have been unimaginable before that, so just never get so hyped up that you have blind faith in something, or that they're not lying to us. I want to X-Files poster, I want to believe in Ryan Condell. Martin did say he broke the pilot episode script with him. And they don't have a pilot? They did have a pilot. The first episode is called a pilot. Condell explained this. He said, we were really surprised when they greenlit us to a full 10-episode series right after Long Night failed, because I was just working on a pilot script. And I thought I'd have to make the pilot, then they'd approve it, then we get ordered for a full 10-episode season. But I guess they'd lost so much time with the debacle of the Long Night. And also HBO had new owners. AT&T had bought them out by then. That Long Night was Plepler just picking something for the sake of picking something to look like he was busy. The AT&T people who came in actually wanted to make a show, and I think they realized how bad Long Night was, realized that Dance of the Dragons was Martin. Martin said, this was my first pick to make a prequel, in terms of prequel eras you could make. And they thought Condell's pilot script was good enough that they said, this pilot script, which apparently was co-written by George R.R. Martin himself, dude, this is so strong, we're not even going to make you film the pilot. Let's just greenlight the 10-episode season to active filming. So that is apparently what happened, and I don't think Martin will be credited with any other scripts. I don't care if he is. I care if he's having regular discussions with the showrunners about story elements. Seems to be what's going on. So you might see his name in the opening credits for the first episode as not just the usual based on novels by George R. R. Martin, but it'll say co-written by Ryan Condell and George R. R. Martin. That's pleasant. I just wonder, I don't need to have his name in the writing credits to prove that they're listening to him. I need to have the show itself demonstrate that they're listening to him, or in interviews, or he said, "Come at me, Reddit." I hope he does an AMA, or little things that you guys wouldn't think about. He says, "Oh, why do we make that story decision with this was the wife of Strong?" Or we don't know who Alicent's mother is. The books never say who her mother is. So there's points where, like, someone's wife isn't mentioned. They'll need to invent a backstory for someone. I hope they run it by Martin, where they go, "We really should explain who Alicent's mother is." I hope if something like that, and if he then goes in the inside the episode, preferably, or at least in a Reddit AMA, "Oh, I had this discussion with Martin about it, and this is what we decided." That is what will win us over, not tokenism, not lip service and pleasantries and the song and dance of on camera going, "Best season ever. Of course we're working well with George R. R. Martin." He is arguably more involved in this than he was in Game of Thrones, even though he technically got to write scripts that they could overrule him on things that made no sense, even in season 1. Versus when they have a big decision to make, they will ask him about a story thing. And you see why this is an hour-long thing. It's such a complicated answer. How involved is he in writing it? Well, I don't think he's writing that many specific scripts ever again, but he has veto power, that they actually defer to his story decisions. That is actually what I would prefer. So I want to, how much are they working with him is not measured in credited scripts. It's measured in the discussions that they are going to demonstrate to us over time, story element by story element. And in case you can't tell, I am walking into this with cautious optimism, and as much as he can, question of why are you being so hard on Ryan Condal? I actually think Ryan Condal has done everything he hypothetically could up to this point, because it hasn't started airing yet. That he's tried to say in interviews, "I'm working with Martin," said his relationship with him. I'm just saying the real test is yet to come. The real test is if, when they do inside the episodes and interviews, for story decisions, Condal can give a good explanation. And he hasn't had the opportunity to do that yet. So I'm actually not trying to be hard on him. Everything I have seen about Ryan Condal so far actually impresses me. I'm just urging caution that I remember when we did the same thing for Benioff, and what's worse, when we did the same thing, fan channels trying to hype the Long Night prequel, when even the Long Night prequel wasn't trying to hype up its involvement with Martin. People wanted it to be true. Of course, at this point, I don't think the problem House of the Dragon is facing is that the hype fandom abandoned this franchise, so it's no longer people blindly believing it'll be good. It's we have to work against the bias now that, guys, Benioff and Weiss are gone and we have sane people running it, it's okay to come back. That now the groupthink, the crowd mob opinion is, we shouldn't even watch this show, which is a lot easier to fight against than blind faith. But blind hatred is in some ways easier to fight than blind faith, because you can prove someone wrong if you get it right, versus telling someone this guy isn't the cult leader you think he is. He's actually really bad at this. You've drank the Kool-Aid. It's harder in many ways. Cautious optimism, and yes, it seems that Martin is discussing things pretty clearly with them, but I put more weight on Martin's own words about this than I do on any other writers, and Martin himself has had good things to say about Condal. We will see.